in the Reformed crowd, of which I consider myself a part, there is a tendency, or has been a tendency, to shy away from pro-life advocacy this way. And by the way, there are people who have not shied away from it. I've heard John MacArthur preach convincingly on abortion. I've heard John Piper preach convincingly on abortion. And I've heard others. I think of my friend Michael Savello. I think of other colleagues of mine that I know that are biblically grounded, that preach on abortion and don't see a dichotomy here. But I have run into some brothers and sisters in the Reform movement that will come to my events, and the first words out of their mouth is, how does what you had to say relate to the gospel? And it's like they didn't listen to any of the argument, and they're almost, how do I put this? It doesn't matter whether your case was well argued. They want to know chapter and verse. And so there's two questions I'd like to throw by you. The first is this: what are they failing to recognize about the relationship between pro-life advocacy and the gospel? And then secondly, is it the case that we as Christians always need to cite a chapter and verse before we convey moral truths? Love your thoughts on both of those.
Yeah, a lot of what you said, I have heard you. I would say you're one of the best that I know at bringing the hope of the gospel to the situation of abortion, right? And I see that, different people on both sides of, abolitionist or pro-life, that debate. But it is something that, how can the sin of abortion, how can that sin be atoned for? It's only by the grace of God through the gospel, right? So I see a direct line between those two things. And I think when people are shying away from talking about it, and you could put any sin in that category that people from the pulpit are afraid to talk about, you're not you're not sparing them guilt, you're actually sparing them healing. I feel like I'm regurgitating you and others that I've heard when I say that, but it is true, right? It has to be called out. It has to be, David, when Nathan comes to him, he calls him out, and that was the start of his repentance. If Nathan would have tried, I don't want him to feel guilty about this. I don't want to cause him pain in this. He would have not had salvation, right? It was through realizing he was the man, repenting of it. Salvation was the next step in that. So I think there could be some fear in that, right? Hey, if I talk about this, what will people think? And this is something like in the US, it's a political issue, right? Whether we want it to be or not, it's a political issue. It's not that way in all countries. It's not a political issue like it is in the US. So we work with a nonprofit, and they're in different countries dealing with this. And it's like, it's just, we don't have to think about it the same way because it's not a political issue, right? And so it is so dividing on the political, there is the temptation to soft pedal it so that, hey, I don't want to be seen as this, so I have to soft pedal it. So I do think there's a hurdle there. 30,000 foot view though, back in the day, you had the timer where it's like the first hour is theology, doctrine, the second hour you turn it over, and now application. We have really dwindled that down. And so, you chop sermons in half, and you only got an hour or only got 30 minutes. I think that we have said, well, the most important thing is the doctrine aspect. So we'll get to that, and we'll touch on a little bit of the application. And with that, inevitably, right, whether that's right or wrong, like that is what's happening. Inevitably, some of the application side of things has to be, and maybe we're justifying it as, well, that's what we'll do in small group, or that's what we'll do, whatever, right? We're going to get to that other places. So as far as like on a Sunday morning in a sermon, why are people shying away from that topic? I think that could be an element of it, right? Hey, we only got time for so much,
right?
Hey, I talk about abortion every year, on Pro-Life Sunday. So what more do you want from me? I got a lot of topics I need to talk about. And one thing in that, though, is not not being aware of the world that we're living in at the time. Like in the time of Israel, when they're in captivity in Egypt, and the Pharaoh says, kill all the firstborn, right? You had the midwives there that refused that order, right? They took action inside of the space that they could, and they did something. They didn't say, if I refuse this, what are the consequences? Or they recognized it as a significant thing. They recognized their proximity, and they did what they could inside of their situation, right? And so I feel like to not address this, right, you have the innocent shedding of blood of the most vulnerable people, right? If true religion is to care for the widows and the orphans, certainly that by extension, the least of these, the child in the womb, is someone to be defended. And we kind of set that aside as kind of, well, we'll talk about it once a year kind of thing. I don't think that is understanding the world that you're in at the moment. The same way, I guess, if you're a pastor in, when slavery is legal, and that's the thing that's being discussed, for you to ignore that topic is to not really understand your sheep and what they're dealing with.
Yep.
And taking the truth, the doctrine, and giving them right application of that. Hey, this is what it looks like to love your neighbor who is a slave, right? This is what that should look like for you. Well, this is what it looks like to love your unborn neighbor, right? And there should be feet behind that. And the feet, the different actions could be different. Different people have different gifts, skills, abilities, and all that. But to not talk about it at all, or to talk about it infrequently for how large of an issue it is, I think they're just not understanding the gravity of it.